Do you want to unlock your inner excellence? Do you want to learn how to think like a champion? My name is Jim Murphy, and I'm a performance coach and author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Inner Excellence. With Inner Excellence, you'll learn how to perform under pressure, remove mental blocks, achieve greatness, and fully live every moment. Sound good? It's all in Inner Excellence. Available now where books and audiobooks are sold.
Today, the beverage aisle looks a lot different than it used to. America's beverage companies are working together. We're delivering the options everyone wants. In fact, nearly 60% of beverages Americans buy have zero sugar. You'll find more variety than ever, including more of your favorites, now available with zero sugar. You'll also find more sizes and clear calorie information on the front of every can, bottle, and pack. We know when it comes to finding balance, the more choices, the better.
Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
This is Pint Glass Football, part of the Radcast network. I'm your host, Brad Fowler. What's up, PGF Nation? Today, we're handing out draft grades for the AFC and NFC North and South divisions. And trust me, some of these teams absolutely nailed it, while others might have just wrecked their future. You are not going to want to miss this one. But joining me, as always, a guy with a first-round grade who would never slide into the fifth, my co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what is going on?
There should be some applause there. Very good, Brad. Very good.
Yeah, let's talk about it. You guys obviously know who we're talking about. It became the story of this draft. It dominated the coverage, and look, rightfully so. And I think we have to address it right off the bat here. The Cleveland Browns end up drafting Shedeur Sanders, but not, of course, with the #2 overall pick, not even in the first round, but all the way in the fifth. And man, this really dominated all the coverage from this draft. And I understand why, Alex. We have a lot of teams to get into and a lot of players to cover, so not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this. I'm sure you guys have heard all the reasoning and how he bombed interviews and all that stuff. I get it. But it is really unprecedented to see a guy who was virtually a lock to be the consensus #2 quarterback in this class, and some people's even #1 quarterback, myself included, fall all the way into the fifth after several quarterbacks got taken ahead of him. What did you make of this fall from Sanders before we get into this draft grades?
So actually, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it on the football side first. I'm going to save my other commentary for another time. I think this was the league perhaps making something to do about the NIL players and make an example out of Shedeur. I think it has something also to do with Deion and perhaps the brashness of Deion in the way he talked, among other things. And I don't believe for one second if Shedeur played in the SEC, he would have slid this far.
Yeah, it's fascinating, all the stuff that's coming out. I think that you're right. I didn't sit through these interviews. I don't know how bad they actually were, but for whatever reason, that seems to be the report here, that he turned off a lot of teams. And look, he wasn't an elite prospect. And if he had elite traits, they might have overlooked some of that stuff. But when you're a B+ prospect, not an A+ prospect, it's a lot easier to just say, you know what, we don't want to deal with that. There's a lot of layers to this whole story, and I'm sure we're going to find out more and more as it comes out. But let's talk about the Browns and what they did do in this draft class. Of course, also getting Shedeur Sanders late in this draft, but he was the second quarterback taken, which is really fascinating, Alex. I actually have the Browns with an A+ grade. I love what they did, Alex. I think this is one of the best draft classes that they've had in a really long time. And it really starts at the top, because when they traded back from #2 to #5 in that deal with the Jaguars, they added a lot of draft capital, including a 2026 first rounder. And they still were able to land my #2 ranked prospect in this class, Mason Graham, at pick #5, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. Elite. I thought that was a tremendous move by them to start this draft.
You really start talking about why you start that grade out even before you get to the rest of the picks with an A+, because they traded the second, like you said, in the 6th round pick for the 5th. They also got a 2nd round pick. They also got a 4th round pick, and then another 1st round pick next year, which to me was too much to simply move from 6 to 2. That is pick a non-quarterback. So you pay, I guess we're going to call it now, what, the Travis Hunter tax, I guess, for what Jacksonville traded up for. But nonetheless, I think when you go through the Browns, who we knew were going to be players in the trade market because, if I'm not mistaken, they came in with 13 picks. And that in the end, they only made 7 picks. But they put themselves in position, getting Mason Graham, a guy that we talked about, a guy that I was enamored with and was pounding the table for the Raiders to get. We'll get into that later. But Brad, that second round pick, Carson Schlesinger, another player that I was looking at, linebacker who's able to cover. They needed another middle linebacker to go along with JOK. They pick up Quinshawn Judkins. It was, if you look at the 2 2s, the 2 3s, and the 4, they really hit on everything. Because you know how I felt about Dylan Gabriel. I said if this guy was 6'4", 6'5", he would have been in the first round, given what he did in college. But then you get Quinshawn Judkins. Now you have another back in the room. You also get Harold Fanning Jr. because Njoku's contract is coming up. This guy is a project, but he's a project with a big upside. And then you also come back and you get Dylan Sampson as another running back. And we know everybody's running a 2 running back system right now. And then even getting Shedeur, you have now created a situation where you could perhaps, whichever one hits, whether it be Shedeur or whether it be Dylan Gabriel, you have Joe Flacco for a year. Somebody's not going to be on this team, and there's only 3 preseason games. Hey, Brad, guess which preseason games are going to have the highest ratings this preseason?
Oh, you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, Carson Schlesinger, like you said, one of your guys that was on your sleeper list, great blitzer, big-time athlete. You know how I feel about Judkins, one of the best running backs in this class, powerful downhill runner. Harold Fannin, a guy that I know was in your top 5 tight ends in a very deep tight end class, by the way. Big time production. Dylan Gabriel, a guy that made our top 5 quarterback list, didn't make a lot of other people's, but we were high on him. Seeing him go in the 3rd round kind of validates what we saw on tape, Alex, with him, a guy with a lot of potential at the next level, even though most didn't see it. And Dylan Sampson, you're right, a guy that was just outside of my top 5 running backs, but really nice value in the 4th. And then, of course, Shedeur Sanders. And look, we'll wrap up the whole Shedeur Sanders thing here. But look, I don't love doubling down at the quarterback position. That to me is a little strange here, but getting the number 1 ranked quarterback on my board in the 5th round, I mean, that's just incredible value. This guy was essentially a top 25 player on nearly everyone's draft board, no matter how you felt about him. So incredible value getting him. And the one thing I do like about this situation for Sanders is he's in a quarterback room that's crowded, but there's a clear path for him to find success, and he's going to have a real shot at it. So you're absolutely right about the ratings here. I think Kenny Pickett is going to be the odd man out. I think Deshaun Watson, they finally ripped the Band-Aid off and take the big hit with his contract and get rid of him. And I think they go into next season with Flacco as the starter and Dylan Gabriel and Sanders fighting for the backup spot. Going to be really interesting what happens there. But all in all, hard to not like what they did in this draft. Alex, let's jump to the Baltimore Ravens. This is another team that I feel like gets an A grade almost every year for me. This team drafts as well as anybody in the league. There's a reason that they're a contender in the AFC every year, it feels like. And it starts with their first overall pick. Number 27, they take Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia, my number 8 ranked player on my big board. They get him at pick 27. Great value. It feels like every year they get a player like this. When you pair a guy like this up with Kyle Hamilton at the safety position, they have the potential to have maybe the top safety duo in the NFL.
Yeah, and we know that Malachi Starks, if you watch from a freshman on, he's very versatile as well. So he can drop down and play slot. He can also cover. He's a little bit small, but he can cover. So he spent time all over the field playing at these different cover positions. And if they ever go into a single high, you don't ever have to worry about him dropping down and taken advantage of in the cover situation. He can do that as well.
Their 2nd round pick, number 59 overall, they take Mike Green, the edge rusher out of Marshall, another guy that was my 20th ranked player in this draft, 2nd best pass rusher in this draft. They get him at pick 59. Unbelievable value there. If you move down the board here, some other picks that I liked, Alex, Emory Jones Jr., the offensive tackle out of LSU. I think it's just a good value pick overall because this is a guy that you should be able to kick inside to guard. He'll have an impact right away. And then I go down to the 5th round here because Carson Vincent, the offensive tackle out of Alabama A&M, one of your guys, Alex, a sleeper that you really like. I think he's also likely to slide inside to guard, but this guy has length and quick feet, and I thought that was a really nice value pick in the fifth.
Yeah, you hit on it. Those are the same guys that I would have taken a look at as well. I mean, obviously Mike Green. If you take a look at Baltimore, they've been lacking those outside rushes that they usually have. They haven't had one that's been consistent in a while. Mike Green comes in with that pedigree. We all know why. There's a few things off the field that's more probably the reason that he dropped more than anything. But nonetheless, he goes to a great organization that if anything that like that pops up, you have somebody like T. Sizzle, you have a Ray Lewis, you have Ozzie Newsome, the guys that know how to handle any type of situation and can get a kid back on track. The Ravens are the team, and I look for big things from him the way that this team is set up. He could be a possible rookie of the year.
Yeah, look at all these picks in the 6th round too, and I think they capitalized on a few of these picks because Tyler Loop, the kicker at Arizona, I thought was the best kicker in this draft. Clearly, they had an issue at that position that we won't get into, but they had to address it, and they get the number 1 player on the board there. At pick 210 in the 6th round, Anenas Peebles, the defensive tackle out of Virginia Tech, another big-time sleeper. I really like this guy's tape, Alex. Great value for a guy who I think will instantly be in their defensive tackle rotation. And then another 6th-round pick that I like, Robert Longerbeam, the cornerback out of Rutgers. This is a guy that I think they're going to move inside and play the nickel, and a really nice value late in this draft as well. A team that just seems to find value from the start of the draft all the way to the finish. They find ways to get a multitude of picks, and here they are with another A grade for me.
Yeah, I have an A grade. I have an A- for them as well, and it's really probably more around what they did in the 4th round. And I thought they should have taken a chance on a wide receiver here. They have a lot of guys that do a lot of the same thing in the middle. These in the middle receivers who are slot guys, and they do have one. We know they have DeAndre Hopkins, but that's a 1-year deal. I would have taken a chance here. As we saw Jalen Royals go to the Chiefs there, and as well as Elick Ayomana. I hope I said that correctly. A guy who's a boundary guy that I thought you could bring in and then kind of have behind DeAndre Hopkins. So when he leaves in this year, you have another young guy right there to step right in.
Let's move on to the Pittsburgh Steelers here. I thought they had a solid draft, not quite as good as these other teams that we mentioned at the top. But they started out in the 1st round with pick 21, Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle out of Oregon. This is a guy that I had mocked to the Steelers at 21 because I thought he was the perfect fit and a need for them. Power, quickness, they could use some youth up front. They took Caleb Johnson, the running back out of Iowa, in the 3rd round. They didn't have a 2nd-round pick, part of that DK Metcalf trade. But in the 3rd, I thought they found nice value with your guy, Caleb Johnson. Power back, one-cut runner, gets downhill. They needed to fill that hole at the running back position after losing Najee Harris. I think he's going to pair really well with Jaylen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell.
Derek Harmon is going to be a good addition to that team. You already took your lap for that, Brad, because you had them mocked there. I think I had Kenneth Grant mocked there for me at that point in time. But you nailed it with them. That guy's going to be able to fit right in. He's going to be more than likely a day 1 starter. But I think the real pick here is the I believe I'm saying again, Yaha Black for the nose. They've been looking for a nose. I know I like Keanu Benton, but I think he's better as a defensive end in the 3-4 and not the nose. And Yaha Black with his size, I believe he's about 6'6", 336 pounds. A big, huge, massive eater of blocks. I want to point out that 4th round pick, Jack Sawyer. I thought that was a lot of value. I believe he was on my list of sleepers too. Jack Sawyer, I think you could put him on. I think you put his hand in the dirt, and I think you can also stand him up. And with that Steeler defense, I think he's going to see a lot of one-on-one coverages and the motor that he has. But I think the main thing here that we know about the Steelers, not close here with this, is that they were not looking for a quarterback because this was the team that everybody said, if Shedeur falls, this is the team he should go to. Well, they had about a good 4 chances where he fell, and they did not choose him. Instead, they opted for national championship winner Will Howard in the 6th round. So that's the quarterback they decided they will take a flyer on there. Those first 3 picks, I think they get back to Steeler football. Big defensive ends and a smash mouth running back.
Yeah, Jack Sawyer at pick 123. Aha Black, the defensive tackle that you mentioned out of Iowa, was pick 164 in the 4th and 5th. I think this was great value because you bring some youth back to that defensive line. Both of these guys were in my top 100 players. So great value at 123 and 164. Will Howard, I don't understand. And this is the one knock I have on this class. Why wait until the 6th round to address quarterback and then go with Will Howard, a guy who I don't even think is a future NFL quarterback? I thought that was shocking. Given their chances to land a guy like Shedeur Sanders, like you mentioned, having multiple opportunities to land him earlier in this draft, or if let's say he's not as high on their board, you still had a chance at 3 or 4 other guys that were available throughout this draft that are just way better prospects than a guy like Will Howard. So wasn't a big fan of that. The only other player I'll mention before we move on, Carson Bruner in the 7th round, the linebacker out of Washington. This was a legacy pick, kind of a cool pick for them. His dad, Mark Bruner, was a former 1st-round tight end for the Steelers. So kind of cool to see that come full circle for them. So, Alex, what did you have for the Steelers? What grade did you give them?
I gave them a B.
Yeah, and I have a B-. So we're in the same ballpark. Cincinnati Bengals, round 1, pick 17. Another guy in my mock draft I had penciled in here, Mar Stewart, the edge defender out of Texas A&M, a guy that we talked about during the pre-draft process. Boom or bust player. And look, big-time athlete. The traits are off the charts, but the college production is just not there. And so unless he can put it together at the next level, which is what they're banking on with those traits, this is a guy who has boom or bust written all over him.
Yeah, I have to agree, Brad. I know they need to go deep. We know they need to go defense. Sam Hubbard retired, so we knew that defensive line. Well, you drafted Miles Murphy, and you had Joseph Osei that coached them up, but this wasn't the pick here, especially when the previous year, a draft or 2 ago, you reached for DJ Turner. You have Cambridge Taylor. You needed a corner. You clearly needed a corner. Now, whether you took Maxwell Harrison or Jahdae Barron, who ended up going, I believe, 3 picks later to the Broncos, the value was too high for cornerback, and the back 7 is where you have your biggest problem.
Yeah, keyword is value throughout this draft for Cincinnati, because in the 2nd round, pick 49, they take Demetrius Knight Jr., linebacker out of South Carolina. Look, he's a good player, but I felt like this was a bit of a reach. I think he would have been there later in this draft. In the 3rd round, they take Dylan Fairchild, the guard out of Georgia. This is a guy who allowed just 1 sack in his college career. So I understand that he's a good pass protector. That's what you're looking for with Joe Burrow, to get him some pass protection, something they struggled with last year. But once again, in the 3rd round at 81, another guy that I think was a reach. So throughout this draft, you get a lot of guys like that. In the 4th round, Barrett Carter, linebacker out of Clemson. Not a bad player, but a guy who really hasn't returned to that early career form that we saw for him the last couple of years. He never really developed into the player that I think we thought he was going to be when he burst onto the scene for Clemson. The only player that I really like value-wise in this draft was their 6th-round pick, Taj Brooks, the running back out of Texas Tech, a guy that's coming off of back-to-back 1,500-yard seasons. I think this was by far their best pick and a nice value. But there was a lot left to be desired for the Cincinnati Bengals draft.
There was a big miss in the 1st round, but there was a huge miss in the 2nd round, getting Demetrius Knight Jr. And again, to my point about the edge, if you go to Jahdae Barron in the 1st round, look who was waiting for you there in the 2nd round. I'm not sure if I had him on my sleeper, but I know I talked about him a lot. Not Shamar Stewart, but his teammate Nick Scroton, who I said is the better pass rusher. He was sitting right there for you to take them, and you would have had your 1-2 punch. You would have taken care of your defensive backfield, and then you would have gotten your 2nd pass rusher. Brad, I gave them a C-.
Yeah, that's exactly what I had, Alex. I was tempted to go with the D. That Taj Brooks pick bumped it up to a C- for me because I think that was a really nice value pick. And I understand some of the needs that they addressed. I just didn't like a lot of the players they took, and where they took them is what I had the most issue with. Let's move to the AFC South, and let's start with the top of this draft here. Tennessee Titans, obviously number 1 pick in this draft. They took Cam Ward, the quarterback out of Miami, number 17th ranked player overall. My number 2 quarterback. He was most people's number 1. I get it. They had to take a swing on a guy like this with the upside, and he definitely has the most upside of any guy in this class. The quarterback room was a complete mess for them, so this was a no-brainer for them. I don't think he's an A-plus blue-chip prospect. I think there is some parts of his game that he's got some red flags. He's a little bit reckless with the football, but I understand when you look at the traits and all the big time throws this guy can make and the athleticism, you got to take a swing on a guy like Cam Ward at the top.
That quarterback room was literally the worst quarterback room, worse than the Raiders, and that's saying a lot. So I have no problem with the pick here in Cam Ward.
And in the second round, pick 52, they go with Oladejo, the edge out of UCLA. I actually like this pick. Versatile defensive lineman. Tennessee finished with the third fewest sacks last year. So outside of quarterback, which they addressed, obviously, I felt like this was a position group they had to address early in this draft. And they get a guy that I think should be an impact player early in his career. In the third round, they take Kevin Winston Jr., the safety out of Penn State. This guy was great in 2023. I mean, he had some awesome tape. He was hurt in 24. But I think getting a guy like this in the third round was actually nice value because if he returns to form, he could be a really good player.
Kevin Winston, definitely like that pick. In the middle rounds, I loved the pickup of Gunnar Helm. I thought that was they had a tight end there last year whose name I am not going to pronounce because I will butcher it. But they definitely had a tight end that there was a lot that was supposed to be thought of him, and he did not deliver. So you needed to get a guy. Gunnar Helm is a nice developmental piece to go along with what they already have there on offense. I will say this though. They did a lot of drafting of wide receivers, which is some of the reason I ended up knocking them down a lot in terms of their draft grade, getting Shamir Dyke and get Alex, Ayo Maynor as well. I'm about to say the Chiefs. Excuse me. The Titans are flush with a lot of wide receivers. There's Calvin Ridley, there's Van Jefferson, there's Tyler Lockett. They still have Treylon Burks. So that they are deep at wide receiver. They didn't know, by the way, I believe one of their undrafted free agents was one of Cam Ward's biggest weapon, and Xavier Restrepo. So they brought him in as well. So I knocked their grade down to a C- simply because I just thought they could have gone in different directions in those rounds with all the plethora of wide receivers they already have on the team.
Yeah, and in the fourth round, they took Chimere Dike, the wide receiver out of Florida, who I know you're familiar with, your Gators. Look, I like Dike, but I don't like where they took him here in the fourth round because there were better wide receivers still on the board. So I thought this was a bit of a reach here. I thought they could have gone a different direction if you're going to go receiver there. I do like Gunnar Helm, the tight end out of Texas in the fourth. I know you were a little higher on him than I was, but still a solid pick there. Ayo Maynor at the wide receiver out of Stanford. Good player. I have no problem with it in the fourth round. The guy that I really like late in this draft for them, though, Jackson Slater, the guard out of Sacramento State. This is a guy that I think could be a steal. He was great in pass protection, and I think he's a guy that has the potential to develop into a potential starting center for them. So I think he was a really nice value in the fifth. Cale Mullins, the running back out of Michigan in the sixth round, another really solid addition to that running back room late in this draft. I have a B for them. I didn't think it was a home run class, but I like that they were at least trying to get this young quarterback some weapons, maybe addressing it too much, Alex, to your point, and not always taking the right guy, so to speak, but getting a tight end, getting some receivers, addressing the pass rush, and addressing the offensive line. I can't be mad at the strategy.
And I'm not. Yeah, I guess if I was to push it, maybe I'd give him a C+. But Brad, at some point, whether it's the YouTube, we're going to have to talk about the massive fall off of these Michigan running backs.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case, isn't it? This is one gets interesting, and I'm really curious to get your take here. Jacksonville Jaguars. Well, we talked about the Browns. They had the big trade with the Browns, so they could move up to that number 2 pick to get Travis Hunter, the cornerback wide receiver out of Colorado. Look, I love Travis Hunter. I think he was the number 1 player in this class. He was the number 1 player on the board for a lot of people, and I get why. He's a great player. But trading up from number 5 to number 2, I love the player. I hate the trade. You give up picks 5, 36, 126, and a 2026 first rounder, and second round picks 104 and 200. I'm sorry, that is way too much draft capital to give up for anybody that's a non-quarterback. It did not make any sense to me. This team, quite frankly, has way too many roster holes to give up that kind of draft capital. Plus, the other part that I think stings here is, look, as good as Travis Hunter is, and I think he'll be a really good pro, defensive tackle was their weakest spot on this roster, and they could have drafted Mason Graham if they would have stayed put at 5. So I hated this big trade that they made with the Browns.
So Mason Graham would have been the better fit. I had been saying it wasn't going to be a fit, but once I looked up the defensive scheme, they're going back to a 4-3. So if you go back to a 4-3, and now that's what Mason Graham, because he didn't fit in a 3-4, but in a 4-3, if you're saying your bookends are Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen, that gives you a really good defensive line. That can get after the quarterback. I didn't like what they did in I believe that's the 3rd round when they went they went back-to-back picks. The Caleb Renshaw and Wyatt Maliam from West Virginia. I thought they could have gone a different direction with the 2nd pick. And I say they need a second quarterback because I don't know where they will mainly play Travis Hunter. Will they mainly play him at wide receiver and then sparingly at cornerback, or will they play him at quarterback and sparingly at wide receiver? I'm not sure what they're gonna do there. But you're absolutely right, Brett. I mean, their whole draft really boils down to that trade. And then as you get deeper into the draft, there's not a lot of things that I like. I'm sure there's a couple guys that was just a value picks, but there wasn't anything outside of Travis that I loved about their draft. And I flirted with giving them a D+, but I will give them a C-. Actually, you know what, Brad? No, I'm going to give them a D+. I'm going to stick with what I originally had written down. I'm going to give them a D+.
Caleb Ransaw real quick. Cornerback out of Tulane. 3rd round, I like this pick. The guy has impressive ball skills, and he's a versatile defender, a guy who lined up outside, inside, even played some safety. They needed help in the secondary, so I don't dislike that pick at all. In the 3rd round, Wyatt Milam, the guard out of West Virginia, I thought this was a great pick. And this is one of those picks that kind of saves their draft for me because I flirted with giving them a D as well. But this is a guy that didn't allow a single sack in 3 seasons at West Virginia. I thought that was very good value there. Now, in the 4th round, this is where it gets a little ugly. Tootin, the running back out of Virginia Tech. Look, home run hitter, ran a great 40 time, but this guy just fumbles the ball way too much. And look, I love the speed and the playmaking, but that guy is a liability with ball security. That's a big issue for me. Later in the 4th, they take Jack Kaiser, the linebacker out of Notre Dame. This is a big reach in the 4th round. There was a lot better players on the board. This is more of a special teams player, and I don't think you target special teamers in the 4th round, especially in this draft where you had a lot of depth. Now, late in the draft, they had a couple guys that I do want to mention because I liked. Jonah Monheim, the center out of USC. This is a really versatile offensive lineman, a guy who started at left tackle, right guard, and center. Pretty impressive, the versatility he showed. I think that's really nice value late. And LaQuint Allen, the running back out of Syracuse. This is a guy that I, quite frankly, was shocked was available in the 7th round. I thought he was a guy that would probably go somewhere in the 5th round. 3rd down back, and I understand that he's not going to be a feature back. He's more of a 3rd down back, more of a scat back, but a really good player in the 7th round. So I thought a couple of these later picks kind of saved this from being a really awful draft, but the trade, I think, certainly hurts. You just can't give up that kind of capital. I gave them a C, just very underwhelming. And like I said, some of those mid and late picks saved this from being a D grade, but I understand your grade completely, Alex. Indianapolis Colts, 1st round pick number 14. They take Tyler Warren, the tight end out of Penn State, my number 3 ranked player in this class. Absolute steal at 14. Versatile, impact player day 1. In the 2nd round, they take a guy that was on your sleeper list, Alex, JT Tuimoloau, the edge defender out of Ohio State. Look, this guy was a former 5-star recruit, and it shows when you watch the tape. High floor player, because I think he comes in ready to play day 1, a great run defender, but a guy who also had 12 sacks last season. So I thought they really nailed the start of this draft.
I guess at this point, they just took best player available is what I see there, because you don't have a quarterback. So you just took best player available because you do have weapons. don't have anybody to get the ball to them. You know, JT, I love that pick. I guess by that, reading the tea leaves, goodbye, Quiddy Pay, because your time will be up. Next year, they will not be bringing you back. They will move forward with JT and Latu in last year's first round pick, Latu. So you're gonna be out of here unless you pick up the pace or, you know, get yourself traded. And the rest of the draft, I did like Jalen Travis getting the offensive tackle. DJ Giddens is a guy that I did like. Riley Leonard as a team that needs a quarterback. Didn't understand that one at all because he doesn't throw the ball forward. He just runs forward. So perhaps they're going to use him in packages. Is the only thing that I can assume. They picked up Khalil Herbert, but then DJ Giddens is another guy that's really well. And perhaps in a year or two, they are looking at perhaps moving on from Jonathan Taylor, and DJ Giddens can then slide in.
The third round, Justin Wally, cornerback out of Minnesota. This guy I really like in the third round. He's a zone coverage cornerback, but allowed just one touchdown last year. Very good in coverage. You did mention in the fourth round, Jalen Travis, the offensive tackle out of Iowa State. I think is a good player. I just thought it was a reach. I thought the fourth round was a little earlier than I expected him to come off the board. In the fifth round, DJ Giddens, the running back out of Kansas State. Now I love this pick. This is a guy who broke 1,200 rushing yards in each of the past two seasons. A productive, really solid running back in the fifth round. Now, you mentioned Riley Leonard, the quarterback out of Notre Dame in the sixth round. Look, you're taking a flyer on a quarterback late. They have big question marks at the position, like you mentioned. So I get it from that standpoint, but I'm with you. I don't see an NFL quarterback with Riley Leonard. Maybe there's some developmental upside there, but whatever. I didn't think it was a great pick by any means. But all in all, I do think this was a pretty rock-solid draft for the Indianapolis Colts because those first three picks I think are all really solid, and I really did like the fifth pick with DJ Giddens. What grade do you have for the Colts, Alex?
So I have a B- for the grades, but that's been kind of my wheelhouse for the Colts for the past few years. They don't hit home runs, but they hit a lot of singles and doubles.
Yeah, I agree. I had a B- written down as well, so we're definitely seeing it the same way there. Now, let's wrap it up with the Houston Texans here. This is a team that had to address offensive line and wide receiver earlier in this draft. And after losing their best offensive tackle and then dealing with the injuries they had to their wide receiver group, plus losing Stephon Diggs, I just felt like those were positions that they had to attack early. And right out of the gate, their 2 second-round picks to start the draft and then their third-round pick, they go wide receiver, tackle, wide receiver. And these are all guys that I really like. Jaden Higgins in the second round. They didn't have a first-round pick, so their first pick was in the second round. Jaden Higgins, wide receiver out of Iowa State, 6'4", explosive on the outside. I thought that was a great pick. And then a guy that I know you really like as well, Alex, in the second round, later in that round, Ariante Irsay, the offensive tackle out of Minnesota. I think this is one of the best offensive tackle prospects in this draft. Great first step, quick feet, size, length, excellent in pass protection. And then, like I mentioned, the third, they go back to wide receiver, and they go get Jaden Higgins, running mate there at Iowa State. Jalen Noel, a guy that I think was climbing draft boards late in the process because people watch the tape and realize this guy brings speed and great after-the-catch ability, can play in the slot. So now you've got this young quarterback who really needs help with protection and could use some more weapons. And I thought they did a really nice job addressing that early.
I like what they did in the early rounds, which is really where I kind of put my grade at, specifically the way they've been reshaping this offensive line, because they lost a lot. When you trade a Laramie Tunsil, who's probably a top 5 left tackle, you bring in Cam Robinson to replace him. And then you also bring in Trent Brown, Ed Ingram, and Laken Thompson. They added a lot of depth, and then now drafting Ariante Irsay, who's a guy that I believe will be a starting right tackle, the guy that looks like he could develop into a 10-year starter. I love that. You already mentioned the wide receivers. They did have to do a lot of revamping around that, losing Diggs, losing Tank Dell. So they obviously nailed that down as well. So I look at this draft, Brad, and I gave them a strong B+ because I liked what they did. But one thing I didn't understand, drafting Graham Mertz in the 6th round. I know it's developmental, but that's not the developmental guy that I want at all. But I did like Jalen Reed in the 6th round as a safety. This team is really stacked and loaded with young players. They're just adding to specifically on defense.
Yeah, I knew you were going to mention Graham Mertz. The only notes I have next to Graham Mertz's name, not an NFL quarterback. Enough said. Jalen Smith, cornerback out of USC in the 3rd round. I think this is a guy that could develop into a very good nickel corner. So I think that's a good pick. And then in the 4th round, they take another kid out of USC, Woody Marks, the running back. They traded a future 3rd rounder to move up from 179 to 116 so they could take Marks. Look, I like the player a lot. I'm not sure trading up was necessarily worth it. So I don't love trading capital to go get him, but I get it. They clearly liked him. They wanted to make sure they got him. He is a good player, and he's really good catching out of the backfield. So he'll add another weapon out of the backfield, not just in the running game, but in the passing game. And Luke Latchley, the tight end out of Iowa in the 7th round, he was on my sleeper list. Great value in the 7th. This was a really deep tight end class, and I think it's the only reason that a guy like this was still available. And the other thing I like about this guy is he's a very complete tight end. He's a classic inline tight end, so he's going to help out with that offensive line by being a really solid blocker in pass protection and in the running game. But he'll give you an outlet in the passing game as well. And then, of course, you mentioned Jalen Reed, the safety out of Penn State. Just a sleeper and a great, great value in the 6th round. I'm surprised he actually fell that late in this draft because I think he's a really, really good player. For me, Alex, top to bottom, I thought this was an outstanding draft. I have the Houston Texans with an A-. I think this is one of the better drafts in the NFL this year. Let's shift to the NFC North. Let's start with the team that hosted the draft, the Green Bay Packers. 1st round pick, 23rd pick overall. They take Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas. Number 2 ranked wide receiver on my board. Great value here at pick 23. I doubt they expected him to be there, even though I think that he might end up being just a high-end number 2 in the NFL. I'm not sure he's a true X, but an explosive playmaker and a guy that, like I said, just tremendous value at pick 23 to start the draft off for them.
Yeah, Matthew Golden will make the plays that Christian Watson was always too hurt to make. That's the only statement I have there.
2nd round, they took the offensive tackle out of North Carolina State, Anthony Belton, very versatile offensive lineman. I think he could be a starter at multiple spots, or at the very least, I think he offers a lot of value as a backup. He'll be able to step in and be a really good plug-and-play player for you. In the 3rd round, interesting pick here, Savion Williams, the wide receiver out of TCU, a guy that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about on the podcast yet, Alex. The Cordell Patterson comp, I think, is legit. That's the comp that I keep seeing over and over again with this guy. When you watch his tape, I get it. And it's really because he's more of an athlete than a true wide receiver, but a big-time athlete. Too many drops is probably my biggest concern, but he's, oddly enough, he's good in contested catch situations, those 50-50 balls. But, man, you get the ball in this guy's hand, and he is explosive. So in the 3rd round, I like the upside with this guy.
Let me ask you, Brad, when you get to that 4th round, do you think they picked him because they knew he was back there? That's the only question I have. The 4th round pick, Barron Sorrell out of Texas.
48 quarterback pressures. A guy that just got better every year at Texas. I like that pick. Did you think he wasn't a good fit there?
Packers are incredibly young, and all they do is consistently hit doubles and triples. That defense is so young. One of my favorite players, Brad, Lucas Van Ness, hasn't even gotten his shot yet, and they're still bringing in more guys. So this team is ready to explode if Jordan Love can keep his head on straight.
Yeah, I also really like their 5th round pick, Alex. Colin Oliver, the linebacker out of Oklahoma State. This is a guy that they're going to move to the edge because he's a natural pass rusher. So I think that was a really nice value in the 5th. In the 6th round, they take a guy, Warren Brinson, the defensive tackle out of Georgia. The only reason I mention him is because just like Oliver, these guys are both very good versus the run and can get pressure in the backfield. So to your point, Alex, really adding a lot of depth up front in that front 7 for the Packers. I like this draft. I don't love this draft. To your point, it's a lot of doubles, maybe a triple, but no home runs, nothing flashy, so to speak. But a nice, solid draft for the Packers. I give them a B-.
And I gave them a B.
All right, perfect. All right, Minnesota Vikings here. Now, they only had a couple picks here. I think cornerback was maybe their biggest need going into this draft. And I think this is where their draft took a hit for me because they failed to even draft one. Now, I know they had limited picks, but you got to take a flyer on a corner here, I think, when you're looking at possibly your biggest need. Now, guard was their other key spot of need. Now, they addressed it with Donovan Jackson, the guard out of Ohio State, in the first round. I think it's a solid pick, a guy that should probably start day one. Definitely don't love that pick, but I get it. You had to address that position. Probably could have waited on guard, though, because there was so many guards in this draft, and especially so many tackles that projected to play guard in this draft. I think there wasn't a ton of value taking somebody like that at 24, but not a bad player, and it fills a need. In the third round, because they didn't have a second-round pick, they take Ty Felton, the wide receiver out of Maryland. Look, this was, I think, their best pick in this draft. 96 receptions, over 1,100 yards. I watched him play live, Alex. He is a very underrated player, and I think this was a great pick for them.
I'm still going to take Maxwell Harrison because that has been their biggest need. Or how about taking Malachi Stark so you can finally let Harrison Smith relax and retire? How about that? Because that's really the pick you should have taken for the value as well as for the need. You have him there a year with Harrison Smith, who can train him up in the ways as great as he's been for that organization. But you're right. Quarterback was their biggest need, and they didn't address it. And since they didn't address it, and I like Ty Felton, however, they have a plethora of wide receivers already and ones that they brought in. I gave them a C- on their grade.
Yeah, the only other player I'm going to mention here was their fifth-round pick, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, the edge defender out of Georgia. Very little production, but has a lot of big upside traits. And look, when you're taking in a guy in the fifth round, I don't mind as much taking a guy with traits and kind of hoping that he develops, because at that point in the draft, all these players have red flags at some part of their game. So I don't hate that pick. Overall, though, yeah, they only had a handful of picks. I feel like they didn't utilize them as good as they could have. Ty Felton is the only player that I really, really like, and I like that they addressed guard early because it was a position that they had to address. I gave them a C. Just a very underwhelming class for the Vikings, and quite frankly, it's starting to become a trend with this team come April. Let's move on to the Chicago Bears. I'm excited to talk about this group because there's a lot of buzz around this Bears draft class. I'm excited to hear what you think about it, Alex. With the 10th overall pick, they took Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan. I think Chicago right now, it's become very clear they're doing everything in its power to set up Caleb Williams to find success in year two. I think adding a guy like Loveland, a polished receiving tight end, is a really nice move early in this draft. Plus, a guy that I mentioned was climbing draft boards, so it doesn't really surprise me to see him go before Tyler Warren. He's not as complete of a tight end as Warren, but he's younger and more explosive with the ball, so I understand this pick. In the second round, really loved this pick, Alex. Luther Burden III, wide receiver out of Missouri, home run pick for me. Luther Burden is an absolute dog. This is a guy who plays tough and is a yards after the catch monster. So I love going and getting a couple more weapons for your young quarterback.
I like the pick. We figured they were going to either go tight end or they were going to go running back. Obviously, there was a lot of talk about them perhaps trading up to try and get Genty. That's actually the position that I'm going to look at, in a position that was as deep as we said it was. I know in the 7th round they drafted Kyle Monagi, but I felt that they should have gone a little bit earlier and tried to get a running back, namely Caleb Johnson. I would have gone and I would have drafted Caleb Johnson, or perhaps traded back to the top of the 3rd round and draft him. I thought that they needed a running back in the room with all the changes they made to that offensive line, specifically the interior. That type of runner with what they did on paper with the interior, I thought he would have fit. He would have fit the culture in terms of Chicago, and he would have fit how the scheme is set up in Chicago to run the ball.
Yeah, I don't hate that, but I will say I love the pick they took at 56 overall in the 2nd round, Ozzie Trapillo, the offensive tackle out of Boston College. I think this is a very underrated player in this class. NFL prototypical size, huge frame, long arms, NFL DNA. His dad played in the league. I think this is a guy who can come in and make an impact early in his career for them. And once again, I'm never going to be mad when you've got a young quarterback to get him weapons and protect him. So I get what you're saying about running back. I think it could have been addressed maybe a little earlier in the draft. But I like Monagai out of Rutgers. I really, in the 7th round, I thought it was actually really good value because this guy ran for 1,200 plus yards in back-to-back seasons. So very productive running back late in the draft. I liked their 5th round pick, Zaw Frazier, at the cornerback out of UTSA. This is a guy who was productive, had 6 interceptions last year. Shamar Turner is a guy we talked about later in the 2nd round. They had a lot of 2nd round picks. At 62 overall, a versatile player, primarily is going to be on the interior defensive line, but a high motor guy who gets after it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a guy that they'll be able to rotate between Gravon Dexter and Grady Jarrett, since they'll be in front of him. So they'll have a nice rotation of the interior rushing. Zaw Frazier is another guy at UTSA that size and frame. I think this team is set. When we get to our projections, this is going to be something that we're going to have to talk about.
Yeah, I think the only pick that didn't make a whole lot of sense was in the 4th round. They took Ruben Hypolite, the linebacker out of Maryland. I just thought they took him a little early. I think he's more of a special teams guy. I think in the 4th round, there were some better players on the board. But all in all, I thought this was a really, really solid draft for the Bears. I gave them an A-.
I gave them a B+ simply because I thought they needed to address running back to finish everything out, like address every single thing, which is what they did. I thought they should have got, so I gave them a B+ because of that.
All right, let's wrap up the NFC North with the Lions here. Look, I'm just going to jump right to what I didn't like here. Donovan Ezeraku was on the board at pick 28, and Mike Green was available at pick 28. Their number one need, number one with a bullet, as my co-host likes to say, by far was edge. They had to find another edge rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson. And you had those 2 guys on the board, and you went with Tyleik Williams, the defensive tackle out of Ohio State. Now, look, good player. Don't get me wrong. I like the player, but not at pick 28. Maybe pick 48, but at 28, I really, really didn't like the way they started this draft off.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. And as I said in previous pods, where I said, is he a guy, or is he a beneficiary of Jack Sawyer and JT on the edges? Like, who's the guy? I say it all the time. You can go look at that Clemson line of Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, and Cleveland Farrell. It always happens. One of these guys is not the same, and I think he's the guy that is not the same.
Now, 2nd round, they take a guard out of Georgia, Tate Ratledge, 3-year starter. They had a need at guard. I think this was a solid pick. In the 3rd round, this is a player I really like. Isaac Tesla, the wide receiver out of Arkansas, one of my sleepers in this class. If you guys don't get the newsletter, you're missing out. Alex and I put out our sleeper list a while back with some of our favorite sleepers on there. So go to pintglassfootball.com, sign up for the free newsletter so you can get these articles when they come out. But this is the guy who made the list for me, Alex, because he's a big-bodied wide receiver, 6'4", 217. The only thing I didn't like about this pick was, once again, loved the player, didn't like how they acquired him. They traded up from number 102 to pick number 70 to take this guy. And I think at that point, it's a reach. There were several better wide receivers still on the board. And look, he would have been there in the 4th. I think they really reached for this guy, and they gave up 2 2026 3rd-round picks. That, I think, really hurts. So, look, like the player, just didn't like the strategy at all. So I'm definitely going to ding him for that. In the 5th round, they take Miles Frazier, the guard out of LSU. Very good pass blocker. The only other player I want to mention here, Alex, was in the 6th round, Ahmed Hassanin, the edge out of Boise State. If you guys remember, they kind of highlighted this guy during the combine, because he's from Egypt and a very, very raw player who hasn't played a lot of football. He's still kind of learning the game, but man, he's got a lot of upside because he's a really good athlete. So taking a flyer on a developmental guy like this in the 6th round, I definitely don't hate that. But all in all, I'm curious to get your grade here on what the Lions did.
I gave them a C+, Brad, and it's a lot of what we said specifically at the top of the draft. You're still in your, I guess if we want to say for the most part, I know they lost coaches, but player-wise, they're still in their window. You lost Jonah Jackson the year before, so you had to end up replacing him. I'm fine with that. Again, you don't know about Jamison Williams, so you're going to go ahead and get you another wide receiver so you can figure out and push him to see if he can continue what he started last year. But the Tyleik Williams, I have to ding you for that. Brad, you're absolutely right. They needed to get a pure pass rusher. They did not. Subsequently, I'm going to ding them for something they didn't do in the 7th round that I thought they should have done. They have two safeties back there that were basically 1 and 2 in interceptions back there. So they kind of solidified back there. And I thought they should have taken in the 7th round, I thought they should have taken a flyer on Quinn Ewers. Because, as a developmental piece, a gunslinger that can, in that offense with that offensive line, perhaps you could have developed into something. I don't know, but I just thought they should have taken a flyer on him.
Alex, I'm giving the Lions a C-. I'm not as high on this class. I thought it was okay. Not a complete failure. I like some of the players. It was mostly the strategy and, of course, moving up when I didn't think they needed to. And then, of course, missing out on two of the best edge rushers in this class sitting right in front of you, I thought was a huge, huge miss in the first round. Look, I expected the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to take an edge rusher in the first round, but you've got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin both missing a lot of time last year. And then you look at Evans. This is a guy who's going to be 32 years old. He's going to be a free agent soon. Wide receivers started to make more sense once I thought about it. And so you get an instant contributor with Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver out of Ohio State with the 19th pick overall. This guy is the most polished route runner in this draft. Big time experience. He's a big playmaker, can separate and can make plays at all three levels. So I thought that was actually a sneaky good pick in the first round. In the second round, Alex, the cornerback out of Notre Dame, Benjamin Morrison, one of Alex's guys. I know you love this guy, can really cover in man-to-man, physical cornerback with a lot of skills. I thought they started off this draft really well.
Yeah, I like the way they start off the draft, too. You mentioned Benjamin Morrison coming back from that hip injury, fully healthy. This guy is probably going to push to start right now. They have him slotted behind. I think it's Zion McCollum. I believe he's slotted behind him. But this is a guy that's going to end up more than likely starting and getting on the field because he has high production.
Yeah, and then in the third round, they go back to corner and take Jacob Parrish out of Kansas State. I think the combine really shot this guy up draft boards. Explosive traits, really tested well. I think he projects as a nickel corner and a guy that could be an early contributor. I love these next three picks, though, for them. In the fourth round, David Walker, the edge defender out of Central Arkansas, big-time sleeper in this class, showed out at the Senior Bowl. Great pick in the fourth. I mean, he really put on a show at that Senior Bowl, Alex. I know we were talking about it for days after that. In the fifth round, Elijah Roberts, the edge out of SMU, one of the guys that made my sleeper list, NFL size, NFL length, big-time production player at SMU in the fifth round. I love that pick. And then in the seventh round, Tez Johnson, the wide receiver out of Oregon. Look, very undersized player, but elite speed, elite quickness, I think was definitely worth a flyer.
Yeah, so I'll say this. I didn't take a look at the cornerback deals because, I love looking at the actual, the cap and where everybody is, which kind of tells you what the teams are doing. But if you look at how the Tampa Bay is set up, they already gave Chris Godwin a deal, but he's coming back. He should be healthy. But you're already set up that when Mike Evans if he decides to retire in 2 years, they give him a 2-year extension, you're coming in with already Chris Godwin, Emeka Egbuka, and let's not forget Jalen McMillan, who had 8 touchdowns last year, Brad, that they hit on as well. You set up Baker for success because you ended up getting a wide receiver as well. Your offensive line is stacked. And then we said this draft wasn't super sexy in terms of superstar tandem in the first round. However, we said the draft would be one in the third, fourth, and fifth rounds. Well, Jacob Parrish, David Walker, and Elijah Roberts. And to your point, Brad, about edge rusher, let's also remember, whether we like him or not, they also did bring in Hassan Reddick as that other edge rusher, so he is there as well. So those guys will get to rotate along with him to keep that pass rush fresh, with Hassan Reddick being the anchor.
So, Alex, I think this is one of the best drafts. I gave them an A. I think they hit on every one of these picks and did a great job of filling needs and finding value throughout this draft all the way to the seventh.
Yeah, I agree. I gave them an A. I gave them an A-. I think Tez Johnson is also a steal with all the wide receivers that I mentioned that are on the team. But right now, when that came on between this season and the previous season, Tez Johnson has a chance to perhaps steal somebody's job. And when I'm talking about you, Sterling Shepard.
All right. Atlanta Falcons. Now, this was an interesting class for sure. First round, 15th overall pick, Jalen Walker, linebacker out of Georgia, number 11 ranked player on my board. So nice value there. No problem with this pick. A hybrid player, but I think he's going to be more of a pass rusher for them, but a very, very good player. I know a guy that you really liked as well. Now, in the first round, they also took at 26, James Pierce Jr., the edge out of Tennessee. Now, the Falcons gave up a 2026 first-round pick to move up from number 46 into the first round to go up and get Pierce. I like Pierce, and I like that they addressed the pass rush need that they desperately needed to in this draft. So don't get me wrong. From a strategy standpoint, you look at it on paper, you're like, okay, Jalen Walker, James Pierce, all right, there you go, Falcons. They needed that. But I don't like the strategy because they could have stayed put right where they were and took Donovan Ezaraku, who would have been available at that pick. Much, much better value. So I don't like giving up a first rounder for that move at all. It's not a shot at James Pierce. This is more about the draft strategy and how they acquired him. Donovan Ezaraku is a really, really good pass rusher, and they wouldn't have had to give up that draft capital for him. So I didn't like that move, Alex. What did you think of that bold decision by them?
For me, James Pierce, it is a shot at you. He's just a better player, and he's a better fit for what they need. You come in, you were lazy. You were not taking the coaching. These are the things that we heard because we knew that you came in as the top prospect, alleged at edge, and you dropped down to basically the bottom at 26. And probably if they didn't trade back up to draft you, maybe perhaps the Ravens do something, but you probably fall to the second round. So I absolutely agree with you with especially the compensation to trade back up to 26 and give up a future first round pick of a young team where you do not. And Brad, the one thing we also have to mention, I'll still go through their draft some more. Let's talk about it. They got Xavier Watts, a player that I love, I thought was great. But then they came back in the fourth round, drafted another safety, Billy Bowman. You already have Jesse Bates there. You let Justin Simmons go. So why are you drafting back-to-back safeties in the same draft? And we just talked about players that they could have drafted that could have helped them. We just talked about they need edges, correct? They could have drafted. David Walker was still there. Baron Sorrell was still there. There were guys that were still there and available. And Brad, oh, by the way, they did not replace Grady Jarrett. They did not replace the middle of that line. I know they drafted the kid out of Ohio State. I'm ranting now, but because I'm upset about not getting my guy Michael Penix right. But Rook Arojo, I don't think he's going to be able to come in and do the things that Grady. You needed to address some more things on this line with this defense that you did not address, but you did finally address with one of my favorite players in the draft, Jalen Walker, who is a leader and will be a leader amongst men on that team.
Yeah, you mentioned Xavier Watts. Look, we both love this guy. Great value in the third round, a ball hawk safety, 6 picks in 2024. Great instinct, smart player. Love that pick. But then, like you mentioned, Billy Bowman Jr., a safety in the fourth round. Look, a former 4-star recruit. I remember when this guy came out of high school. Great athlete, big-time speed. There's only one problem. He can't tackle. That's kind of a big deal when you play defense. So I didn't like that pick at all, Alex. I'm with you. It did not make a lot of sense doubling down on safety there. And like you mentioned, just didn't like the strategy at all. I'm with you here. What's your grade for the Falcons?
I gave them a C+. I also have to mention Quincy Riley was there. You needed another corner, but a C-.
You know, I had a C+, so we're right there. I think the only reason I bumped it up was Xavier Watts. Xavier Watts was the one I really, really like Xavier Watts, and I really like Jalen Walker. And I actually think James Pierce is a really great athlete with a ton of potential. I just hated the strategy. The strategy was just did not make sense to me. So that was really what they're getting hit for here. Let's move on here. Carolina Panthers. Curious to get your thoughts on this team. With the 8th overall pick, they took Teteroa McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. Now, all the reports coming into the draft, especially late in the process, was that this guy was going to slide. And I didn't have him in my mock draft because I kept hearing over and over again that this guy is going to slide, he's going to slide, and could maybe slide out of the first round. Did not expect him to go this early. But I don't hate the pick here, Alex, because this is a big target for a small quarterback. And when you think about it in those terms, it actually makes a lot of sense giving a guy a big target like this. And when we look at what Bryce Young did, he played really well down the stretch last year and really bought himself some more time with this franchise to develop. So give him another weapon, continue to try to see what he can do here and develop his skill set with a big target. Now, McMillan, he's got some flaws. He's not a perfect prospect by any means. 8 might have been a little early, but I understand pairing him with this quarterback.
Yeah, I at first I was a little bit, I said, I wouldn't have done that there because I don't believe in the play that much. But I said, you know what? It's a quarterback league, and This is now, you're going to be going into the third year for Bryce Young. He looked, like you said, he turned the corner towards the end of the year. So why not give him another guy along with Xavier Legette, along with Adam Thielen, and I believe they also picked up another wide receiver that they have. So he's got a plethora of weapons now on that team. They've also picked up Jimmy Horn Jr., who I mentioned, as well as Hunter Renfrow. Same player, but just difference in age. But I remember saying Jimmy Horn is going to make a great slot in this league, and I think he's on a team where he's going to be able to get on the field and do some things. But I can say, yeah, definitely I was against the pick, but I ended up liking it because you have to find out about your quarterback now going into next year's draft and figure out some things. The second, third rounds, I love those two picks. They lost so much with Frankie Louvu. Shaq Thompson is a free agent. They addressed the edges, so I like those picks there. Then we get to the fourth round. And that Trevor Etienne pick in the fourth round, I didn't understand that pick. The Panthers have so many running backs that they never get to put on the field. You have Chuba Hubbard. You signed Rico Dowdle, who had 1,000 yards when he finally got a chance. But they also drafted what a lot of people thought was the best running back in last year's draft in Texas's Jonathan Brooks, who didn't even get on the field because he was injured. So why go back to the well right there to go in the fourth round to go back and get another running back?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of I like the player, I don't like the pick. Trevor Etienne forced 30 missed tackles last year. He's elusive. He's got great ball security. I like the player. I don't understand it either because you're right. That's a really crowded running back room with a lot of young running backs too. So I don't know if that made sense. I love the pick of Nick Scorton, the edge out of Texas A&M. We've talked about him a bunch. Run stopping ability, but also had 15 sacks in the last 2 years combined. Multiple pass rush moves. Really good player. I like that. And then Princely Umanaliam, the edge out of Ole Miss. I'm sure I just butchered that name. I apologize. But look, this guy had a 17.9% pressure rate, a guy that can collapse the pocket. So I like those picks a lot as well. Now, I'm curious your thoughts on Cam Jackson, the defensive tackle out of Florida in the fifth round. I know you're a big Florida guy. To me, I think this pick was a nice value pick because he is a big early down run stuffer. Maybe not a 3-down defensive tackle, but I think a guy that really adds some value there on those running downs.
Yeah, you're talking about a space eater for the most part. That's really what he is. He's a space eater, and on those running downs, he's gonna help out a lot.
And then, like you said, Jimmy Horn Jr., wide receiver out of Colorado in the 6th late round pick, I thought was a nice value pick late because he's a very solid wide receiver.
I actually gave them an A-. I thought they addressed some things at a very high level, especially the edges where they lost a lot. So I liked what they did there. So I gave them an A-.
I had a B, Alex. I'm not quite as high, but I thought it was a really solid class for this group. And I thought they did a nice job addressing some needs and finding some value there, especially those first 2 picks. But like we highlighted, a couple guys later in that draft I liked as well. All right, let's wrap this up. NFC South, New Orleans Saints, their first round pick. Number 9 overall, Kelvin Banks Jr., the offensive tackle out of Texas. Lowest pressure rate of any left tackle in the Power 4 in the last 2 seasons. That was an impressive stat that I came across, Alex. I had other tackles ahead of him that obviously were still on the board here at 9, but a very good player in a position they had to address, so I don't hate that pick. Like I said, probably would have gone in a different direction, but I know there's a lot of mixed opinions on Kelvin Banks. Very solid player, though. Their second round pick is where it gets interesting here. Tyler Shuck, the quarterback out of Louisville. Now, this was a guy that really started climbing draft boards throughout the process, and I really didn't understand it, Alex. 26 years old, and a guy that taken in the second round here with pick 40 was taken before several quarterbacks that I had ranked higher. Several guys that I know you had ranked higher were still available, especially, of course, Shedeur Sanders, not to belabor that point, but I didn't understand this pick at all.
Yeah, I don't know what the Saints are doing. I honestly don't. And I can tell you my grade right now. It's incomplete because I'm confused. It's like the question was 2 + 2, and instead of saying equals 4, you put equals Kentucky. Like, I don't know what direction you're headed into. You need wide receivers. You need weapons. Instead, you get for whatever reason, that quarterback in the second round when Trey Harris was still on the board, and you need wide receivers. And the only wide receiver you have that you can count on is Olave. So you decide to bring back Brandon Cooks. That doesn't make sense. The Kelvin Banks thing, depending on which way they want to go in direction of quarterback, Brad, I could say at least when they decide to bring in a quarterback, their bookends and Kelvin Banks And, you know, one of my favorite players, Talise Fuaga from last year, they're going to have bookends on the outside and they'll be able to protect whatever quarterback they end up bringing in. But I guess they made this pick to tank, because if I'm the Saints ownership, I'm firing Megan Loomis on the spot. This is stupid. I don't care if we're just talking about the prospect. This is dumb. It's not, and it is a shot at the player. It's actually it's a shot at the organization. What are you doing? You consistently muck up your cap number that you have to keep spending money, pushing it forward, and then you do this with the draft. I mean, this guy's not even better than Dylan Gabriel. I don't even think he's better than Quinn Ewers as far as I'm concerned. I get he had the measurables, but no, sorry and no.
Yeah, no, I didn't understand it either. And actually, there's a few more picks here I'm going to point out that I really didn't like in this draft either. In the third round, Vernon Broughton, the defensive tackle out of Texas. Look, not a terrible player by any means, but I had a late fourth, early fifth round grade on this guy. Taking him in the third round, I think, was a huge reach. And then once again, later in the third round, they take Jonas Sanker, the safety out of Virginia. Not a terrible player, but once again, a big reach. There were a lot better safeties still available on the board when they drafted Sanker. The only players that saved this draft, because this would have been an epic fail for me in a lot of ways if it wasn't for a couple of their late round picks. In the fourth round, they took Quincy Riley, the cornerback out of Louisville. Another guy that made my sleeper list. I really, really like this guy. Instinctive player. He's a ball hawk. He has exceptional anticipation and closing burst. Can really close those passing windows quickly. I love this guy's tape. And then in the sixth round, Devin Neal, the running back out of Kansas, another guy that was on my sleeper list, big time player, great value in the sixth round, has burst, vision, strong receiving running back out of the backfield. Those two players really saved this from being an absolute disaster. And look, Kelvin Banks is a very good player. I'm just not sure I would have taken him at 9. But man, I was not impressed at all with this draft class by the Saints.
Yeah, you can't be, because you know who was the guy picked right after Vernon Broughton? Landon Jackson. You know who's about to retire from the Saints? Cam Jordan. And you have Chase Young there on prove-it deals every year. You just give them small deals. And you have no edge rushers. Why not go and get Landon Jackson, who is a quote-unquote project, but with all these traits, and get him there with Cam Jordan, who can help and coach him up along with the coaches, and perhaps you can turn into something. At this point, you should be throwing everything at the board to see whatever sticks, Saints, because your roster is horrible.
If you enjoy the podcast, do us a favor and subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And later this week, our next episode, we're going to finish our NFL draft grades with the AFC and NFC East and West divisions. Once again, I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.